Tonight, we explore one of the most persistent mysteries in modern history, the craft themselves. Across decades of sightings, radar tracks, military reports, and thousands of civilian accounts, people describe objects that don't fit a single design or a single purpose. Instead, they fall into patterns, shapes, behaviors, technologies that seem familiar in form, yet completely unfamiliar in capability. Some are structured, metallic, and deliberate. Others appear as glowing spheres or fluid forms of light. Many move with precision, hovering silently, accelerating instantly, shifting direction in ways that defy the limits of known engineering. A few slip into the ocean as easily as they travel through the air, and some change shape entirely, almost as if the craft themselves are not fixed objects, but adaptive systems. This video brings those patterns together, not to prove what these objects are, but to understand how they've been described, documented, and pursued by governments, pilots, investigators, and ordinary witnesses around the world. 9 families of craft, 9 ways the unknown has taken form in our skies. Settle in, slow your breathing, and let's explore the craft library of the UFO phenomenon. Chapter 1: The Classic Discs. The story of the disc-shaped craft doesn't begin with headlines, military reports, or the wave of sightings that followed the summer of 1947. It begins in quieter moments, isolated pilot accounts, scattered newspaper articles, and unexplained observations from people who had no framework for describing what they saw. Long before the term flying saucer existed, witnesses were already trying to put into words a shape that didn't fit the aircraft of their time. Some of the earliest descriptions came from aviators in the 1930s and during the Second World War. Their reports weren't dramatic, and they weren't seeking attention. They described objects that were round, reflective, and capable of movement, unlike anything in the sky. These accounts often appeared in flight logs or debriefings rather than the press. They spoke of discs that paced aircraft, hovered at altitudes where controlled hovering was impossible, or ascended vertically with a fluid, silent precision. At the time, these observations didn't form a category. They were simply curiosities, unexplained details, and otherwise ordinary missions. By the mid-1940s, the sightings had become more frequent. Returning bomber crews and long-range patrol pilots occasionally mentioned circular objects in after-action reports. Some wondered if they were Allied prototypes. Others suspected they belonged to foreign powers. But none of the craft described matched known airframes. They lacked visible wings, engines, or exhaust, and they didn't behave like balloons or flares. They moved with purpose. All of this created a backdrop for the moment the world would eventually look back on as the true beginning of the modern UFO phenomenon, June 24, 1947. On that afternoon, civilian pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington State. The sky was clear. Visibility was excellent. Arnold was not searching for anything unusual. He was scanning the area for a missing marine transport aircraft that had gone down a few months earlier. What he saw would reshape the global conversation. Arnold described 9 objects flying in formation at remarkable speed, far faster than any aircraft of the time. He estimated their motion at over 1,200 miles per hour, based on the distance between Mount Adams and Mount Rainier. But the shape of the objects is what stood out. Arnold said they resembled discs, flat and circular, with a skipping or oscillating motion as if they were saucers skipping across water. His attempt to describe their flight pattern eventually gave birth to the term flying saucer, a phrase he never intended to invent. Newspapers across the United States carried the story, and within days, similar sightings poured in from every corner of the country. Farmers, airline crews, military personnel, police officers. The descriptions varied slightly, but the basic shape remained consistent: round, metallic, reflective, and capable of extraordinary speed. Some reports included a central dome. Others mentioned a spinning rim or a luminous glow. The sudden rise in sightings created urgency within military circles. Investigators sought to determine whether these craft represented a foreign threat, a misidentified atmospheric phenomenon, or something else entirely. Project Sign was formed that same year, followed by Project Grudge, and eventually Project Blue Book. Through these programs, hundreds of disk reports were analyzed. Many were dismissed as misidentifications. Some were assigned mundane explanations, but a significant number remained unexplained, enough to keep the subject active within intelligence channels. As the phenomenon evolved, so did the detail in the reports. Witnesses described structured craft with metallic surfaces that glinted in sunlight. Airline crews in the late 1940s reported disks pacing their aircraft before accelerating away at impossible speeds. One pilot near Oklahoma City described a disk the size of a DC-3 that changed direction instantly without banking. Another reported a silent, circular craft hovering just above cloud level, rotating slowly before shooting upward into the sky. By the early 1950s, radar detections began to accompany eyewitness accounts. Air Force radar operators documented fast-moving targets performing abrupt turns, inconsistent with aerodynamic flight. In some cases, radar visual confirmation occurred simultaneously. Operators would see an anomalous return on their screens at the same moment. Pilots observed a disk outside their cockpit windows. Blue Book files contain several instances of radar visual correlations involving circular craft that traveled at speeds beyond known aircraft capabilities. Europe had its own wave of sightings during this period. In France, Italy, and Belgium, civilians and law enforcement reported disc-shaped objects hovering over fields or moving silently across the horizon. In Sweden, military pilots described luminous discs flying near strategic installations. In the United Kingdom, observers near RAF bases reported circular craft with bright undersides that maneuvered against prevailing winds. These cases rarely received public attention, but they were recorded quietly in government documents. South America also experienced a series of notable sightings. In Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, airline crews and naval officers reported disks moving over coastlines and mountain ranges. One Chilean officer described a metallic disk hovering over the Pacific before darting inland at a speed he could not estimate. Brazilian Air Force personnel observed disks rising from the ocean, climbing rapidly and disappearing above cloud cover. These reports were often detailed, structured, and consistent across multiple witnesses. Descriptions of the disks varied slightly by region, but certain features appeared again and again. Witnesses frequently mentioned a smooth surface without rivets, seams, or visible propulsion mechanisms. Many described a spinning or rotating motion, often at the rim. Some noted a domed top or a dark underside, and nearly all described motion that defied conventional expectations. Disks hovered without sound. They accelerated instantly. They performed right-angle turns. They climbed vertically without losing stability. These behaviors remained consistent from the 1930s through the 1970s, suggesting that the shape was not tied to a specific era or cultural trend. By the 1960s, the disc had become iconic. It appeared in artwork, magazines, and films. But behind the cultural imagery, military interest remained cautious. Blue Book investigators maintained that most sightings could be explained, yet many radar operators and pilots who filed reports believed the unexplained minority represented something real and structured. The Air Force's official conclusion eventually downplayed the significance of UFO sightings, but the archived files reveal numerous cases where discs were described by highly credible witnesses. One example came from a pilot over Ohio in 1966. He reported a large circular object, metallic and reflective, pacing his aircraft for several minutes. Air traffic control recorded an anomalous radar return matching the object's position. When the disc suddenly accelerated away, the radar track vanished instantly, something inconsistent with aircraft gradually moving out of range. The pilot described the encounter calmly, emphasizing that the object displayed controlled movement and deliberate pacing. Another case came from Australia in the early 1970s. Multiple witnesses observed a disc-shaped craft hovering near a schoolyard before rising vertically and accelerating toward the coast. The craft made no sound, and its movement was smooth and controlled. Local law enforcement documented the event, and dozens of witness statements were collected. Though the case did not receive international attention at the time, it remains one of the region's most well-documented disc sightings. Throughout the decades, witnesses consistently described the same unusual qualities: silence, stability, reflective surfaces, and precision movement. Nothing about these features suggested random atmospheric effects or conventional aircraft. Instead, the reports pointed towards structured craft with advanced flight capabilities. The shape seemed intentional, aerodynamic in appearance, yet not dependent on aerodynamic principles. Some engineers speculated that a disc shape could theoretically support advanced propulsion systems, particularly those based on electromagnetic or anti-gravity concepts. These ideas remained theoretical, but the consistency of disc sightings kept the speculation alive. The craft appeared designed to move through air without relying on lift surfaces or exhaust. Their ability to hover silently and accelerate instantly suggested a fundamentally different approach to flight. As technology progressed into the late 20th century, disc sightings became less common compared to triangular craft and other shapes. Some believed this shift indicated new developments in classified aerospace projects. Others thought it reflected changes in the phenomenon itself, as if different types of craft appeared during different eras. But the disc never disappeared entirely. Even into the 2000s, isolated reports continued to surface, often from pilots who described metallic circular objects at high altitude. One airline captain flying over the Atlantic in 2005 reported a disc that appeared above the cloud layer, reflecting sunlight like polished metal. It hovered for several seconds before shooting off at an acute angle. The object left no contrail, no turbulence, and no indication of conventional propulsion. His report remained informal, shared only among colleagues, but it echoed the same patterns recorded decades earlier. What makes the classic disc enduring is not just the shape itself, but the consistency of the observations across cultures, professions, and time periods. A disc sighting from the 1930s resembles one from the 1950s, which in turn resembles one from the 1990s. The descriptions remain stable despite shifts in technology and public awareness. This stability suggests that the disc is more than a cultural symbol. It is a persistent feature of a phenomenon that has displayed structured, intelligent behavior for nearly a century. As we look back, the disc stands as the foundation of UFO craft classification. It is the first widely reported shape, the first to accompany radar confirmations, and the first to drive large-scale investigative programs. It represents the beginning of the modern UFO era, not because it was the most dramatic, but because it appeared so consistently and across so many credible contexts. The classic disk remains an essential piece of the phenomenon's history. It is the craft that introduced the world to the idea of the unexplained, a round, silent object moving with impossible precision through clear skies and over distant landscapes. And even though the conversation has expanded to include many other shapes and technologies, the disk endures as the symbol of the unknown. It became our first template, the first form the mystery took, and the shape that continues to appear, quietly and without fanfare, whenever the phenomenon wants to. Chapter 2. The Triangles. The triangular craft arrived later in the historical timeline, and when they did, they felt different from the classic disks, where disks were compact, maneuverable, and capable of sudden acceleration. The triangles appeared large, deliberate, and structured. They moved as if they were built for endurance rather than evasion. Vast, silent platforms that drifted across the sky with an authority that witnesses remembered long after the moment passed. Before the major wave of reports in the late 1980s and 1990s, triangular objects appeared only occasionally in older accounts. Some early witnesses described dark wedges or arrow-shaped shadows crossing the sky at night, but these cases were scattered and inconclusive. Few people associated them with anything unusual. The world hadn't built a category for them yet. They were curiosities, fleeting shapes moving across quiet skies. That changed abruptly with one of the most documented series of sightings in modern European history, the Belgian wave. The events began in late 1989 when multiple witnesses in Belgium reported a large, dark, triangular craft moving slowly across rural areas. It wasn't rushing or maneuvering with impossible precision. It was steady, almost methodical. Witnesses described 3 bright corner lights, a central red or orange light, and a flat black underside. Some said they could see the craft passing directly overhead, blocking out stars as it moved. The sightings continued into 1990 and grew in scale. Police officers filed reports. Civilians captured photographs. Military radar units detected unidentified returns. At one point, Belgian Air Force F-16s attempted to intercept one of the unknown objects after it appeared on multiple radar screens. The results of the attempted intercept were unusual. The radar lock-ons confirmed rapid acceleration, sudden altitude changes, and movement inconsistent with any aircraft the Belgian military operated. Yet, despite the radar confirmations, the craft was never visually acquired by the pilots. What made the Belgian wave significant was not just the number of reports, but the credibility of the witnesses. Trained observers, gendarmes, radar operators, military investigators, all described the same structure, the same shape, the same slow and deliberate movement. The craft didn't behave like a stealth aircraft, nor did it resemble anything from known Western or Soviet inventories of the time. Its size alone was enough to raise questions. Some witnesses estimated the triangles were larger than commercial airliners, moving silently at low altitude. In the aftermath of the wave, the Belgian Air Force released reports and technical summaries. While they did not claim the objects were extraterrestrial, they acknowledged that the craft observed between 1989 and 1990 remained unidentified. It was a rare moment of transparency, and it signaled something that would continue for decades. The triangular craft were not rumors. They were physical objects observed by credible witnesses across multiple systems. As the 1990s progressed, similar sightings began surfacing in other countries. Across the Atlantic, The United States saw a rise in reports of massive, silent triangles moving slowly over residential areas and near military facilities. These sightings often occurred at night. Witnesses described a sense of scale that felt almost unnerving. People spoke of objects the size of football fields, gliding barely above tree level, moving with a grace that felt intentional. One of the most well-known events took place over Phoenix, Arizona in March 1997. Thousands of residents saw a large formation of lights moving silently across the state. While the event is still debated, with one set of lights later attributed to military flares, many witnesses described a unified, structured craft in a V-shape or triangular configuration. They spoke of a solid black mass that blocked out stars, moving slowly and purposefully before disappearing into the night. The scale of the object was enormous, leading many to believe they had seen something far beyond conventional aviation. Another significant series of reports came from Illinois in January 2000. Multiple police officers across several towns observed a large triangular craft with bright lights at each corner. The craft moved slowly along a highway corridor, allowing officers from different jurisdictions to observe it at various points. Their radio transmissions documented the event in real time. Some officers described the object as silent and massive, with a central light that glowed faintly. They noted it did not resemble any aircraft they had seen in their careers. Triangular craft also appeared near Air Force bases, often at low altitude. Witnesses from military housing areas reported objects hovering or moving slowly over restricted zones. These sightings were generally not publicized, but they circulated quietly among personnel. Some speculated the triangles were advanced surveillance platforms. Others believed they were something entirely different. The consistent features across global sightings formed a clear pattern. A large wedge or triangle-shaped structure, 3 bright corner lights, a central glow or light source, a black, matte, or reflective underside, silent movement, slow, steady flight, occasional rapid acceleration or sudden disappearance. The silence of these craft was one of their most distinctive features. Even at altitudes where a large aircraft would produce significant noise, the triangles moved quietly. They didn't create wind disturbance or jet wash. Witnesses often describe the silence as the most unsettling aspect of the encounter. Something so large shouldn't be able to move without sound. Radar returns associated with triangular craft varied. In some cases, radar operators detected large, slow-moving objects that didn't match known traffic. In others, radar tracked sudden, sharp movements inconsistent with large platforms. The combination of slow, deliberate motion and the ability to maneuver quickly created a contradiction that complicated identification efforts. Pilots who reported triangles often described them as structured craft rather than lights or atmospheric reflections. Their size, stability, and consistent shape indicated something manufactured. But no known aerospace design matched their appearance or performance. In the early 2000s, similar reports surfaced in the United Kingdom. Residents near RAF bases described triangular objects moving at low altitude during quiet nighttime hours. Some reports included a low-frequency hum, almost imperceptible but noticeable in still air. Others mentioned the craft hovering motionless before gliding away. The sightings were consistent with earlier cases from Belgium and the United States, reinforcing the idea that the triangles were part of a larger pattern. Other reports came from Canada, particularly near Ontario and Quebec. Witnesses saw large triangular craft crossing night skies with corner lights and a dark underside. Some suggested these were experimental military aircraft, but the size and behavior didn't align with known stealth platforms. Stealth bombers, for example, produce noise and cannot hover. They also do not carry bright external lights in triangular configurations. In South America, similar objects appeared over rural areas. In Brazil, a police helicopter crew reported a triangular craft moving over the jungle with 3 bright lights that illuminated the canopy below. The craft moved slowly and then accelerated rapidly, vanishing within seconds. The officers described it as completely silent. Their report remained informal, logged only within their unit, but the details matched earlier sightings elsewhere in the world. Despite the geographical spread, the behavior of the triangles remained remarkably stable. They rarely showed aggressive movement. They rarely approached witnesses directly. Instead, they drifted, hovered, or traveled in straight, steady paths. This consistency led some investigators to speculate that the triangular craft might serve a different purpose from other types of UFOs, possibly surveillance, observation, or long-duration atmospheric presence. Some analysts proposed that the triangles could be advanced airships or lighter-than-air platforms with new propulsion systems. But the rapid acceleration reported in many sightings contradicted that idea. Others suggested they could be next-generation military projects, but the global distribution of sightings made a single national origin unlikely. For many witnesses, the most memorable part of the encounter was not the movement of the craft, but its presence. Standing beneath a massive, silent triangle left a lasting impression. People described feeling a subtle pressure in the air, noticing the stillness around them, or sensing an unusual quiet. These subjective details didn't appear in official reports, but they showed up consistently in witness interviews. As the sightings accumulated, investigators across different decades reached a similar conclusion. The triangular craft represented a category distinct from traditional UFO reports. They were structured, large, and persistent. They didn't flicker, shift shape, or behave erratically. They appeared engineered for control and endurance. Some researchers believe the triangles might be connected to the black-budget aerospace world, classified projects that the public is never told about. Others pointed to their silent operation, massive size, and unconventional behavior as evidence of technology beyond current engineering. The truth remained uncertain, and no military organization openly claimed ownership of the objects. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, clusters of triangle reports continued to surface. Pilots, military personnel, and civilians all described similar shapes and movements. Some of these reports appeared in newly declassified documents. Others circulated through civilian databases and investigation networks. The details remained consistent with decades of earlier accounts. Across the entire historical record, the triangular craft stood out for one key reason. They behaved as if they were designed for observation. They moved slowly over populated areas without causing disruption. They hovered over rural landscapes with quiet precision. They appeared at altitudes low enough for clear observation, yet high enough to remain out of reach. The triangles felt purposeful, not evasive, not chaotic, but deliberate. Their persistence across continents and decades suggests they are part of a long-running pattern. Whether they represent advanced technology from human sources or something beyond that is a question that remains open. But what is clear is that the triangular craft form one of the most solid categories within the UFO phenomenon. They are structured, consistent, and widely reported by credible witnesses. As we move deeper into the craft library, the triangles stand as the first major departure from the classic discs, not faster or more agile, but larger and more controlled. They show us a different expression of the unknown, one that suggests organization, endurance, and intention. A craft that doesn't just pass through the sky, but moves through it as if it belongs there. Chapter 3: The Tic Tacs. By the early 2000s, the UFO landscape was already filled with decades of disc sightings, triangular craft, and luminous spheres. Those shapes had histories, patterns that stretched back to the mid-20th century. But the Tic Tac was different. It arrived suddenly, without a long trail of historical sightings, and it entered the conversation with a level of documentation that made it impossible to ignore. Unlike discs or triangles, which showed variation in size and behavior, the Tic Tac seemed almost uniform across reports. It was white, smooth, elongated, and featureless, a craft that looked more like a capsule than an aircraft. No wings, no fins, no seams, no exhaust, no control surfaces. Witnesses often struggled to compare it to anything familiar. The name Tic Tac emerged simply because nothing else resembled it. The most well-known encounter began on November 14, 2004, off the coast of Southern California. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group was conducting routine training exercises in an area known for clear skies and stable weather. For days leading up to the event, radar operators aboard the USS Princeton had been tracking unidentified objects descending from high altitudes, sometimes from 80,000 feet down to sea level in seconds. These radar drops were unusual enough to prompt recalibration and system checks. But the returns persisted. Whatever the objects were, they were real, and they were moving in ways that defied known flight dynamics. On the day of the encounter, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate were dispatched to investigate one of these anomalies. Their aircraft, FA-18 Super Hornets, carried no live weapons, only training rounds. This wasn't a combat mission. It was a routine intercept of an unknown target. As they approached the location provided by radar controllers, the sea below them appeared disturbed, as if something large were submerged beneath the surface. Fravor described it as a patch of boiling water, a disturbance with no visible object causing it. Above this area hovered a white capsule-shaped craft, roughly the size of a small aircraft. It moved without wings, rotors, or propulsion. It didn't produce heat signatures. It didn't follow aerodynamic principles. It simply hovered, shifting left and right above the disturbance. Fravor initiated a descent to investigate. The Tic Tac responded. It didn't flee or behave erratically. It reacted intelligently to his movement, rising to meet him as if aware of his approach. When Fravor attempted a maneuver to get behind it, the craft accelerated instantly, not gradually, not audibly, but with a sudden jump that took it out of sight in less than a second. Moments later, the Princeton reported the object had reappeared, 60 miles away, at the exact point where the fighter jets had been instructed to rendezvous after their intercept. The craft had traveled that distance faster than any known aircraft could manage, and it had done so without visible motion or detectable propulsion. When a second crew later filmed the object using their FLIR targeting pod, the footage displayed a smooth, featureless white shape moving calmly across the sky. The infrared camera revealed no heat plume, no exhaust, and no traditional aircraft signatures. When the object rotated abruptly, the sensor struggled to maintain lock, suggesting maneuverability beyond anything the pilots had encountered before. What set the Tic Tac apart from earlier types of craft was not just its behavior. Though the instantaneous acceleration and reactive movement were remarkable, but the multi-system documentation. Radar operators tracked it. Visual observers saw it. Infrared cameras recorded it. Pilots attempted to intercept it. Each system confirmed the presence of a real physical object. This combination of data made the encounter one of the most thoroughly documented cases in modern military history. After 2004, similar cylindrical craft began appearing in other military and civilian reports. Pilots described elongated white objects pacing aircraft at high altitude, moving in straight lines, or hovering before speeding away. Some were reported by crews flying over the Atlantic and Pacific. Others were seen near training ranges. One airline pilot flying along the East Coast observed a white, capsule-shaped craft above cloud level. It had no wings and no contrail, yet it maintained altitude with perfect stability. When the pilot attempted to capture footage, the object accelerated upward and disappeared. His co-pilot saw it as well, and both filed a report with their company. The event did not reach the press, but it circulated quietly among industry professionals. Another military pilot flying near the Middle East reported a similar craft tracking alongside his aircraft for several seconds before veering off. The pilot described it as a white cylinder, with no obvious means of lift or control, matching the physical description of the Tic Tac observed in 2004. These sightings shared consistent characteristics: elongated capsule-like shape, smooth white surface, no wings, fins, or protrusions, no exhaust or visible propulsion, silent operation, instant acceleration, intelligent or responsive movement. The uniformity of these reports suggested a type of craft with a specific design and purpose. Unlike discs, which appeared across many decades and contexts, the Tic Tac seemed to emerge prominently only in the 2000s. This raised questions within military circles. Was this a new type of craft? Had it always existed but gone unnoticed? Or did improved radar systems make detection possible for the first time? Analysts reviewing the 2004 encounter noted that the craft displayed capabilities inconsistent with aerodynamic flight. Traditional aircraft rely on lift, the movement of air over wings, and propulsion systems that produce heat and sound. The Tic Tac did none of these things. It moved as if air resistance did not apply. It hovered without airflow. It rotated in place. It accelerated instantaneously without inertial buildup. Some proposed it used a form of inertia control or field propulsion, concepts still theoretical in modern physics. Others believed it could be a transmedium craft, capable of moving through air and water seamlessly. The disturbance observed below the Tic Tac during the Fravor intercept hinted at an underwater object or activity, though nothing was confirmed. Reports of cigar craft from earlier decades sometimes resembled the Tic Tac superficially, but their behavior and descriptions differed significantly. Older cigar-shaped objects were often metallic, large, and sometimes emitted light or vapor. The Tic Tac, by contrast, was compact, white, and almost clinically featureless. Its movement was more advanced, abrupt, precise, and reactive. When the 2017 New York Times article brought the Nimitz encounter into the mainstream, the Tic Tac became the face of modern military UAP cases. It represented a shift from anecdotal narrative to documented incident. The footage validated what trained observers had seen, and the Pentagon's acknowledgement that the videos were genuine, not hoaxes, not misidentified aircraft, gave the case a level of credibility rarely seen in the UFO field. In the years that followed, additional military personnel came forward with accounts of similar objects. Navy pilots described encounters during training missions, where elongated white objects appeared at high altitude, hovered briefly, and then disappeared. Some pilots expressed discomfort flying in areas where these objects were known to appear, not because they believed the objects were hostile, but because their capabilities were unpredictable and unmatched by known aircraft. Radar operators also described incidents where fast-moving objects appeared on screens, dropped from high altitude to low altitude instantly, or displayed erratic patterns that suggested control rather than random noise. Many of these radar tracks matched the movement patterns seen in the Tic Tac footage. The Tic Tac became a case study in the limitations of current aerospace understanding. Its behavior challenged basic assumptions about lift, inertia, propulsion, and energy. Some analysts speculated it might represent a class of craft designed for reconnaissance or observation. Others believed it might be part of a broader phenomenon involving multiple types of craft with different roles or functions. What made the Tic Tac so compelling was its neutrality. It didn't engage. It didn't display hostility. It moved with precision, reacted intelligently, and remained within observable distance long enough for systems to track it. It was neither evasive nor confrontational, simply present. If the classic disk represented the early era of UFO sightings, and the triangular craft represented a slow, structured presence, then the Tic Tac represented something more refined. It was minimalistic, efficient, and technologically sophisticated in ways that defied conventional engineering. Its appearance signaled a new chapter in the phenomenon, one rooted not in folklore or anecdote, but in verifiable data from modern military systems. As we look across the craft library, the Tic Tac stands apart, not because it is dramatic, but because it is consistent. Its design is simple, its behavior is complex, and its documentation is robust, supported by radar records, pilot testimonies, infrared data, and official acknowledgement. It represents a form of flight that doesn't rely on the principles we understand. A craft that appears designed not to reveal itself, but not to hide either. Something that moves through the sky with precision, purpose, and absolute control. A reminder that the phenomenon doesn't repeat the same shapes forever. It evolves, or it reveals different aspects of itself, depending on the moment. The Tic Tac is the clearest example of that shift. Chapter 4. Orbs, Spheres, and Luminous Globes. Long before radar screens lit up with fast-moving objects, before pilots reported Tic Tacs pacing their aircraft, and long before triangular craft drifted silently over neighborhoods, people were already describing something simpler, spherical objects that glowed, pulsed, or moved with intelligence. These orbs, often small and sometimes metallic, form the oldest and most persistent category in the phenomenon. Their presence stretches across continents, across centuries, and across cultures. The earliest structured reports of spheres came from pilots during the Second World War, though similar descriptions appear in naval logs, mountaineering diaries, and maritime reports from decades earlier. During the war, the objects became known as Foo fighters, a term used informally by Allied airmen. These weren't weapons, and they weren't enemy aircraft. They appeared as glowing orange or white spheres that paced bombers and reconnaissance planes across Europe and the Pacific. Pilots described them as small, silent, and agile, often performing maneuvers no aircraft of the time could match. These luminous spheres did not attack. They did not fire weapons. They simply followed aircraft, sometimes pacing formations for minutes at a time, before accelerating away or disappearing entirely. Military intelligence examined these reports carefully, fearing they might be advanced German or Japanese technology. But neither side claimed responsibility, and post-war documents confirmed that the Axis powers had no such devices. The Foo Fighters remained unexplained, early examples of a class of objects that would continue to appear in the decades to follow. As global aviation expanded after the war, reports of glowing spheres grew more frequent. Airline pilots flying nighttime routes described bright orbs rising through cloud layers, hovering at flight level, or moving parallel to their aircraft at speeds that seemed impossible for small objects. Many pilots compared them to stars that had detached from the sky and begun to move with intention. While some spheres appeared luminous, others were metallic. These reflective objects often appeared during daylight hours, moving at high altitude without wings or contrails. Pilots observed them pacing jets before accelerating vertically at sharp angles. Ground observers described small silver spheres drifting silently overhead before shifting direction with a quick, deliberate motion. Radar operators occasionally detected these objects as small but anomalous returns. Their speed and agility did not match birds, balloons, or atmospheric interference. In some cases, radar visual correlation occurred. Operators saw anomalous returns at the same time pilots reported visible spheres moving alongside their aircraft. These combined sightings suggested that the objects had physical presence and mass, rather than being atmospheric illusions. One of the most striking characteristics of orbs is the sheer variety in their behavior. Some move slowly, drifting across landscapes with no urgency. Others travel at incredible speeds, appearing as short flashes of light or fast-moving points on radar. Some hover silently just above the ground, while others appear high in the atmosphere. Their agility often exceeds that of structured craft. Witnesses describe instantaneous stops, sharp angle turns, and vertical ascents performed without sound or visible propulsion. Historical patterns show that spheres often appear near restricted areas or military installations. During the Cold War, both NATO and Warsaw Pact countries documented multiple sightings of spherical objects near missile sites, air bases, and naval facilities. These incidents typically involved small, maneuverable lights hovering near sensitive zones or following patrol aircraft. The objects rarely behaved aggressively. Instead, they seemed to be observing or surveying. One notable case occurred near Moscow in 1978, when radar operators detected fast-moving objects entering restricted airspace. Visual observers on the ground saw glowing spheres moving silently above the trees. Military units were dispatched to investigate, but the objects disappeared before aircraft could intercept them. The official documentation noted anomalous aerial lights of unknown origin, with no confirmation of aircraft activity. In the decades that followed, similar reports surfaced across Europe, Asia, and South America. Many of these incidents involved multiple witnesses and consistent descriptions. The objects were spherical, glowing or metallic, and capable of controlled, intelligent movement. Some of the most compelling modern sphere cases involve military encounters in the Middle East. In 2016, during operations in Iraq, U.S. forces documented a small, glowing sphere moving near a convoy. The object was recorded on infrared camera, showing a consistent heat signature but no propulsion system. It maneuvered around the vehicles, maintained altitude, and then ascended rapidly, disappearing from view. Analysts reviewing the footage noted its controlled movement and lack of aerodynamic surfaces. Another widely circulated case, often referred to as the Baghdad Orb, shows a small sphere moving horizontally across the sky, making sharp directional changes without losing speed or altitude. The footage was taken from an aerial surveillance platform and displays behavior inconsistent with drones, birds, or debris. Its motion was precise and deliberate, suggesting active control. This video has been analyzed by multiple experts, none of whom could identify a conventional explanation. Spheres also appear frequently in naval contexts. In 2019, crew members aboard the USS Omaha observed and recorded a spherical object that moved above the water before descending into the ocean without creating a splash. Radar operators confirmed the object's presence, and the footage captured its smooth, silent movement. The ability of the sphere to enter the water seamlessly hinted at transmedium capabilities, a technological characteristic explored later in this series. These naval sightings reflect another consistent behavior. Spheres often travel in groups. While structured craft like disks or triangles typically appear alone or in small formations, spheres sometimes move in clusters. Witnesses describe multiple orbs traveling in coordinated patterns, maintaining formation with no visible connection. These group movements suggest a level of coordination or communication between objects. Civilians have also reported clusters of spherical lights moving across the night sky. In some cases, witnesses initially assumed they were observing satellites or aircraft, but the objects often moved unpredictably or changed direction abruptly. Unlike satellite trains, which travel in straight, predictable paths, these orbs demonstrated autonomy and intention. In rural areas, spheres sometimes appear close to the ground. Farmers and hikers have reported small glowing balls moving through fields or forests at low altitude. These objects often emit a soft light, illuminating the surrounding area. They move slowly, occasionally hovering or drifting before disappearing. Unlike drones, they do not produce sound or mechanical movement. The range of sizes reported varies significantly. Some spheres are described as small as baseballs, while others are large enough to resemble compact aircraft. The color also varies: white, orange, red, blue, and even green, though white and orange are the most common. Metallic spheres, particularly during daylight hours, are typically silver or reflective, appearing like polished steel in sunlight. Scientists have occasionally attempted to explain these phenomena as plasma, ball lightning, or naturally occurring ionized gas. While some sightings could potentially fit these categories, the controlled movement and long durations observed in many cases exceed what natural plasma phenomena can sustain. Ball lightning, for instance, typically lasts only seconds and moves unpredictably. Many orb sightings last minutes, display intentional movement, and appear in conditions unrelated to thunderstorms. In some cases, spheres appear to interact with the environment. Witnesses describe glowing orbs passing through trees or hovering near buildings without causing damage. Others report faint electromagnetic interference, such as brief disruptions in radio communication or static on electronic devices. These effects are subtle and not present in all sightings, but they appear frequently enough to be noted in investigative reports. One curious aspect of orb sightings is their frequency. Compared to disks, triangles, or Tic Tacs, spheres are far more common. They are the most frequently reported shape worldwide, appearing in both urban and remote settings. Their simplicity, a glowing or metallic sphere, makes them easy to describe and difficult to misidentify. This ubiquity leads some researchers to speculate that spheres might represent the most basic or widespread type of craft within the phenomenon. The behavior of spheres also suggests a different purpose from larger structured craft. While triangles seem designed for observation at a distance, and Tic Tacs demonstrate advanced maneuverability, spheres appear more exploratory. Their small size, agility, and silent movement imply they may be used for close-range observation or environmental monitoring. Some investigators believe spheres could be probes or smaller autonomous systems connected to larger craft, though this remains speculative. In many reports, spheres appear shortly before or after sightings of structured craft. This pattern suggests a potential relationship between different types of vehicles. Witnesses sometimes describe a disk or triangular craft, accompanied by smaller luminous orbs that move independently. In other cases, spheres appear first, followed by the arrival of a larger object. The simplicity of orbs may be deceptive. Their movement and behavior suggest advanced technology, possibly more sophisticated than larger craft. They transition between states, hovering, accelerating, changing direction, without visible propulsion or aerodynamic limitations. Their small size allows them to navigate environments where larger craft cannot go, and their silent operation makes them difficult to detect or track. The persistence of spheres across decades indicates that they are a stable and recurring feature of the phenomenon. They appear in wartime encounters, airline reports, military engagements, and civilian sightings. Their behavior remains consistent regardless of location or context. As we look across historical records, one theme stands out. Spheres represent the phenomenon at its most accessible. They are the most commonly seen, the most frequently photographed, and the most widely reported. They appear in isolated forests, busy cities, open oceans, and high altitudes. Their presence cuts through geography, technology, and culture. Spheres are the bridge between the structured craft of earlier chapters and the more complex or shape-shifting objects that appear later. They are simple in form, yet advanced in behavior, familiar in outline, yet alien in capability. They remind us that not all craft need to be large or dramatic to defy explanation. Sometimes, the most enduring mysteries come in the smallest shapes, silent, glowing and moving, with a precision that suggests purpose. Orbs are the quiet observers of the phenomenon, appearing consistently and leaving almost no trace behind. They are the simplest form in the craft library and one of the most revealing. Chapter 5: The Black Rectangles and Box Craft. Among all the shapes associated with the UFO phenomenon, the black rectangles, sometimes described as box-shaped craft, are the most visually unsettling. They don't fit the aerodynamic expectations of flight. They don't resemble aircraft, drones, or missiles, and they lack the curved, fluid silhouettes of disks, spheres, or triangles. Instead, they appear as dark, geometric blocks moving with silent intent through the air. These craft are rarely reported compared to disks or orbs, but when they do appear, the descriptions are strikingly consistent. Witnesses often say the same thing in different words. It looked like a floating building, a shape too rigid, too straight-edged, too heavy-looking to belong in the sky. The earliest credible cases date back to the 1960s and 1970s, but they gained more attention in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly in rural areas of North America and parts of Europe. These sightings didn't become cultural icons. There were no movies depicting box-shaped UFOs, no pop culture references, no media frenzy. they appeared quietly, often witnessed by only a few people at a time, and then disappeared just as quietly, leaving behind more questions than answers. What makes the rectangle craft so distinctive is not only their shape, but their behavior. Witnesses consistently describe slow, deliberate movement, sometimes at walking speed, with no visible means of propulsion. The craft move against the wind, hover motionless, or glide with a stability that suggests precise control. They produce no rotor noise, no engine sound, and no vibration. Many witnesses say the silence is the most unnerving part of the encounter. Reports also highlight their edges, perfectly straight, sharp, unmistakably geometric. Some craft appear as simple, featureless black rectangles with no lights or markings. Others have a single red or white light at the bottom center, giving the impression of a small beacon or sensor. A few accounts mention faint seams or slight indentations, but most describe a smooth, uniform exterior. One of the most widely reported sightings of a rectangular craft occurred in the United States during the early 1980s. A farmer in rural Nebraska observed a large black rectangle drifting over his fields shortly after sunset. He described it as the size of a house, moving slowly from west to east. It hovered at low altitude, completely silent, and cast a broad shadow across the ground as it passed. The farmer reported no lights, no sound, and no visible movement on the craft's surface. It simply drifted quietly across the sky before accelerating abruptly and disappearing over the horizon. Around the same time, airline pilots began reporting rectangular objects at higher altitudes. One crew flying near the U.S.-Canadian border described a long, dark object with straight edges hovering above cloud level. The object had no wings or tail and did not appear on radar. When the aircraft approached, the object rotated slightly, revealing a box-like profile, before accelerating upward at a steep angle. The crew filed a report with their company, though no official investigation followed. Canada, particularly Ontario and the Canadian prairies, has its own history of rectangular craft. In the late 1990s, a group of campers near Lake Nipigon observed a large black box descending vertically from the night sky. It hovered above the tree line for nearly a minute, rotating slowly before drifting north. The object emitted a faint red glow from its underside but produced no sound. The witnesses were shaken by the event, noting its size and the unnatural stillness of the air around it. Similar sightings occurred in the United Kingdom. Residents in rural Wales reported a rectangular craft moving low over farmland in the early 2000s. The object was described as a black caravan in the sky, a shape so out of place that witnesses struggled to articulate what they were seeing. The craft traveled slowly, maintaining a consistent altitude before turning sharply and disappearing into faint cloud cover. Local authorities received multiple calls about the object, but no aircraft were tracked in the area. In Germany, particularly in the Black Forest region, hikers and forestry workers have reported rectangular crafts moving silently through valleys during early morning hours. These sightings often involve low-altitude movement, suggesting that the craft are capable of navigating terrain with precision. Witnesses describe these objects as large, dark, and unnervingly stable in flight. Across all these reports, one aspect remains consistent: the lack of visible aerodynamic features. No wings, no rotors, no engines, no exhaust, just a rigid rectangular mass moving with intelligence and purpose. This lack of aerodynamic form has led some analysts to speculate that rectangular craft may rely on propulsion systems fundamentally different from those used by conventional aircraft. Their ability to hover motionless without generating noise or turbulence suggests a non-aerodynamic lift mechanism, potentially a form of field propulsion or inertial control. While these concepts remain theoretical in modern physics, the behavior of the craft implies technologies beyond traditional aviation. Another possibility considered by investigators is that rectangular craft may be modular or utilitarian vehicles, platforms designed for transport, observation, or deployment of smaller craft. Their box-like shape resembles containers or cargo structures, leading some to suggest that they might serve as carrier vehicles for smaller spherical or disc-like objects reported in other sightings. Some witnesses indeed describe seeing small orbs or lights near rectangular craft, moving independently but remaining within close proximity. Whether these represent secondary vehicles or part of the craft's instrumentation is unknown. A series of unusual sightings in the American Southwest supports this idea. In one incident, hikers observed a large rectangular craft hovering over desert terrain shortly after dusk. Small glowing spheres emerged from the underside of the craft, dispersed in different directions, and later returned. The rectangular craft then ascended vertically and vanished from view. The event lasted several minutes and was witnessed by multiple individuals from different locations along the trail. Reports of rectangular objects entering or exiting cloud layers also suggest advanced control. Traditional aircraft disturb clouds due to turbulence and airflow disruption. Rectangular craft, however, appear to pass through clouds without altering their structure. Witnesses note that fog, mist, or low clouds remain undisturbed as the craft moves through them, a detail that challenges conventional understanding of atmospheric dynamics. In some cases, rectangular craft appear to rotate slowly while hovering. This rotation is rarely fast and seems deliberate, almost as if the craft is scanning the environment. Witnesses describe the movement as smooth and mechanical, with no wobble or drift. A particularly compelling case came from an airline crew flying over the Pacific Ocean. Shortly after midnight, the pilot noticed a dark, elongated shape below the aircraft, illuminated faintly by moonlight, reflecting off the water. As the aircraft approached, the object rose toward cruising altitude, revealing a rectangular form with a soft, pulsating light on its underside. The crew observed it for nearly a minute before it accelerated horizontally and disappeared into the darkness. Radar did not register the object at any point during the encounter. The military has occasionally documented similar objects, though official acknowledgement remains limited. Some declassified reports include references to box-like aerial objects detected near restricted training ranges. These documents describe slow-moving targets with unusual radar signatures, often appearing as solid returns that vanish abruptly. Whether these signatures represent rectangular craft or misidentified objects is unclear, but the language used in these reports aligns with civilian descriptions. One reason rectangular craft remain lesser known may be their nighttime appearance. Their dark exteriors blend into the night sky, making them difficult to spot unless they pass near artificial light or block starlight. Daylight sightings are rare, but when they do occur, the craft often appear matte black or dark gray, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Another factor is the lack of cultural context. Unlike discs or triangles, boxes do not appear in science fiction or popular media. People do not expect to see geometric blocks moving through the air. As a result, witnesses may hesitate to report what they saw, unsure of how to describe it or how it will be received. Yet the repetition across independent sightings suggests that the rectangular craft represent a distinct category. Their stability, geometric precision, and silent movement indicate structured engineering. Their size and behavior imply a purpose, possibly surveillance, transport, or environmental observation. In the broader craft library, rectangles occupy an unusual place. They are neither the smallest nor the largest. They are not the fastest or the most agile. They do not approach witnesses closely, and they rarely perform dramatic maneuvers. Instead, they project a kind of quiet confidence, a presence that does not need to be sleek or aerodynamic to move with precision. They challenge assumptions about what flight should look like, and they hint at technologies designed for efficiency rather than aesthetics. In their rigid geometry and silent movement, they reveal a different face of the phenomenon, one that prioritizes utility, stability, and control. Where disks are agile and triangles are vast, the rectangles appear deliberate, almost industrial in design, a shape that should not fly, moving through the air as if weight and drag are irrelevant. A reminder that the phenomenon does not limit itself to forms that make sense to us. Chapter 6: Shapeshifting and Fluid Form Craft. As the documented shapes of the phenomenon grew more diverse, disks, triangles, spheres, rectangles, investigators began to notice a small but persistent category that did not fit into any rigid structure. These were objects that changed shape, shifted form, divided into multiple pieces, or dissolved entirely before reappearing somewhere else. They were the least common type of craft, but also the most difficult to ignore. Their behavior challenged the basic assumption that unidentified objects must be solid, mechanical vehicles. Instead, they hinted at something more dynamic, objects that were structured in one moment and fluid in the next. Reports of shape-shifting objects stretch back further than many people realize, appearing in scattered accounts from the mid-20th century. Pilots during the 1950s described lights that elongated into cigar shapes before contracting into spheres. In the 1960s, ground observers reported objects that grew brighter, expanded outward, and then split into separate lights that moved independently. These early sightings were dismissed as illusions or atmospheric effects. Yet the consistency of the descriptions across geography and decades suggested something more than isolated misperception. One of the earliest and most documented shape-changing incidents occurred during the 1976 Tehran encounter. Iranian Air Force pilots attempting to intercept an unknown object described a craft that emitted smaller spheres or lights that broke away from the main body. These smaller objects moved independently. One approached the interceptor before darting off at high speed, while another descended toward the ground and appeared to land without sound. The main craft itself changed brightness and shape, altering its appearance repeatedly throughout the encounter. Even today, the Tehran case remains one of the most detailed accounts involving objects that seemed capable of dividing or deploying smaller units. In the decades that followed, similar patterns emerged in military and civilian reports. Objects that initially appeared as single bright lights would suddenly flatten, elongate, or split into 2 or 3 smaller shapes. Spheres would merge into one larger orb or disperse into clusters. Some objects appeared to fold or blink out before reappearing nearby, as if shifting state rather than physically traveling. These descriptions often puzzled investigators. Traditional aircraft cannot change shape mid-flight, and even experimental drones rely on fixed structures. Atmospheric explanations, reflections, plasma, auroras, accounted for some sightings, but not for those involving coherent movement, sudden directional changes, or controlled behavior. The difficulty with shape-shifting craft is that they defy categorization. While other types can be grouped by silhouette, movement, or structure, these objects seem to operate by different rules. Witnesses describe them as liquid, flexible, or energetic. Their edges blur, their outlines ripple, their luminosity fluctuates in ways that suggest internal activity rather than external reflection. Some of the most compelling accounts come from pilots, who tend to describe what they see with precision. Several commercial crews flying across the Pacific reported objects that changed shape while maintaining altitude and course. One pilot described a bright object that flattened like a disc, elongated into a cylinder, and then compressed into a sphere within seconds. Another reported a luminous shape that expanded outward as if inflating before contracting sharply and accelerating away. Military pilots have reported similar events. During training missions in the 2000s, several aviators observed jelly-like or fluid objects that did not maintain a stable outline. These objects appeared on infrared sensors only intermittently, suggesting that they shifted between states of energy and structure. Operators reviewing the footage noted irregular heat signatures and inconsistent shapes, characteristics unlike any known aircraft or missile. Some of the most striking sightings occurred at sea. Naval personnel recorded objects hovering above the water that appeared to ripple or wobble, as if their form was unstable. In a few cases, the objects descended into the ocean without splashing, dissolving into a faint glow beneath the waves. This combination of fluid appearance and transmedium capability suggested technologies far beyond conventional engineering. Civilian accounts echo these patterns. In remote areas, hikers and photographers have described glowing objects that twist or deform in the sky, sometimes stretching into elongated shapes before retracting. These objects often appear silent, moving with the same purposeful control seen in other types of craft. Their transformations occur smoothly, without flicker or fragmentation, as if responding to internal mechanisms rather than external forces. Some witnesses describe objects that behave like plasma, glowing masses that shift, pulse, or ripple. Yet plasma alone cannot explain their structured movement, sharp turns, or stable flight paths. Others compare them to airborne organisms, though their rapid acceleration and instantaneous changes in direction contradict any biological explanation. What sets these objects apart is not only their ability to transform, but the intelligence implied in their behavior. They approach aircraft, survey terrain, follow predictable paths, and maintain altitude with precision. Their shape changes do not appear random. Instead, they seem purposeful, part of the object's function, rather than a flaw or instability. In some cases, the transformations appear to serve specific roles. Witnesses describe objects that flatten when accelerating, elongate when hovering, or divide into smaller units before reconvening. These behaviors suggest advanced adaptability, possibly allowing the objects to respond to environmental conditions or operational requirements. One notable example came from Chile in the 2000s. A group of climbers observed a bright, oval-shaped craft that hovered silently above a ridge. After several seconds, the object changed shape, flattening into a thin disk before emitting two smaller lights that moved outward in opposite directions. The main object then elongated slightly before all three lights accelerated vertically and disappeared into cloud cover. The climbers filed a report with local authorities, and the event was later included in a series of unexplained aerial observations documented by Chile's Civilian Aviation Agency. In another case, a weather station in Japan recorded a glowing sphere that expanded into an oval shape before contracting repeatedly. The object maintained altitude throughout the event and moved slowly across the horizon. Meteorological staff reviewed the footage and determined that it did not match any known atmospheric phenomenon. The object's motion and coherence ruled out conventional explanations like reflections or optical distortions. Investigators who study these sightings often point to the limitations of our current understanding of physics. Most aircraft rely on fixed structures for stability, lift, and control. A craft that can alter its shape while maintaining performance would require technologies that manipulate gravity, inertia, or aerodynamic forces at fundamental levels. Such capabilities are theoretical at best within modern engineering. Another possibility explored by researchers is that these objects may not be entirely physical in the conventional sense. Their fluid forms, intermittent visibility, and ability to blink out suggest they may operate between states, partially material and partially energetic. This does not imply anything mystical. Rather, it hints at technologies capable of altering an object's physical density or electromagnetic profile. If a craft can shift between states, its appearance may change as a byproduct of the transition. Some analysts propose that shape-shifting craft may represent a class of probes or autonomous units designed for flexible tasks. Their ability to divide into smaller objects could allow for rapid surveying or data collection. Their fluid structure may reduce drag or adapt to environmental conditions. Their intermittent visibility could be deliberate, a form of camouflage or energy conservation. Despite the challenges in studying them, shape-shifting objects appear in enough credible reports to form a recognizable category. What makes them compelling is their consistency across decades. Regardless of location, dense cities, remote wilderness, open oceans, their behavior remains similar. They appear solid at one moment and fluid the next. They split, merge, expand, and contract with complete control. For witnesses, these objects often leave a deep impression. Unlike discs or triangles, which resemble aircraft in some abstract way, fluid-form craft look unfamiliar. Their transformations appear unnatural, not mechanical, not biological, but something in between. People describe a sense of witnessing technology behaving like matter that doesn't obey the rules. The experience is often quiet and brief, yet memorable. In the broader craft library, shape-shifting objects mark a boundary. They represent the point where conventional interpretations, aircraft, drones, misidentifications, begin to fail. Their behavior challenges assumptions about what vehicles should look like or how they should move. They suggest systems capable of adapting their form, deploying smaller units, or shifting between physical states. They remind us that the phenomenon is not limited to solid geometry. It does not confine itself to shapes we understand. It includes craft that can alter themselves smoothly, deliberately, and intelligently. The fluid form objects are the phenomenon at its most flexible, least structured, and most difficult to categorize. They are the outliers that expand the limits of what might be possible. Chapter 7. Underwater Craft, USOs. Not all unidentified craft remain in the sky. Some interact with the ocean directly, entering and exiting the water with precision, moving through it at speeds far exceeding known submarine capabilities, or hovering just above the surface before descending silently. These objects, known as USOs, unidentified submersible objects, form one of the most consistent and quietly documented categories in the phenomenon. USO reports stretch back decades, long before modern radar or satellite tracking systems. Sailors in the 19th and early 20th centuries described luminous objects that moved beneath the waves, pacing ships or rising toward the surface before disappearing. At the time, these accounts were attributed to bioluminescent animals or unusual reflections, but as technology advanced, so did the clarity of the sightings. Submarine crews, naval patrols, sonar operators, and maritime pilots all began reporting objects underwater that seemed to possess control, speed, and intelligence. By the mid-20th century, USO sightings had become a quiet but persistent thread in naval records. Submarine crews conducting exercises in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic reported sonar contacts that moved too quickly or erratically to fit known profiles. These contacts sometimes circled submarines, paced them, or changed depth faster than any vessel of the era could achieve. In many cases, the objects simply disappeared, either ascending rapidly or dropping to extreme depths in seconds. One of the earliest detailed military USO accounts comes from the crew of a U.S. Navy submarine in the 1940s. While patrolling near the Pacific coast, sonar operators detected an object moving at an estimated speed far exceeding that of any submarine at the time. The contact dived sharply, descending thousands of feet in moments, something physically impossible for any vessel then in existence. The crew documented the event, noting the anomalous speed and behavior, but no official explanation followed. In the decades that followed, similar incidents appeared in naval logs around the world. The Soviet Navy, in particular, documented numerous encounters with underwater objects exhibiting unusual speed and control. Soviet submarine crews reported bright objects moving beneath them, sometimes rising toward the surface before darting away at sharp angles. These accounts, once classified, later emerged through interviews with retired officers and declassified documents. One of the most widely discussed Soviet cases occurred in the early 1980s when a nuclear submarine detected multiple fast-moving contacts underwater. The objects maneuvered around the submarine, maintaining consistent distance while moving in coordinated patterns. Attempts to identify them using sonar profiling failed. The objects did not match the acoustic signatures of submarines, torpedoes, or marine life. After several minutes, they vanished at speeds beyond the limits of any known craft. Naval encounters continued into the modern era. In 1967, the Shag Harbor incident in Canada involved both aerial and underwater activity. After multiple witnesses observed a glowing craft descending toward the ocean and impacting the water's surface, the Royal Canadian Navy initiated a search operation. Divers reported faint lights moving underwater near the crash site, though no debris was ever found. The lights eventually disappeared, and the event remains one of the most thoroughly documented USO-related incidents in North America. Another significant case emerged from Puerto Rico in the 1990s. U.S. Navy personnel stationed near the island observed a fast-moving underwater object on multiple occasions. The object moved at speeds estimated to exceed 100 knots, several times faster than the maximum speed of nuclear submarines. Despite attempts to track or intercept it, the object consistently outran naval vessels and disappeared into deeper water. What sets USO cases apart from traditional UFO sightings is their interaction with the water itself. Many reports describe objects entering or exiting the ocean without creating splashes, turbulence, or sound. A craft descending into the water at high speed should produce significant force, visible spray, and shock waves. Yet USOs often enter the ocean smoothly, as if the boundary between air and water does not impede them. A modern example came from the crew of the USS Omaha in 2019. While conducting patrol operations, personnel recorded a spherical object moving above the ocean's surface. The object hovered silently, then descended rapidly into the water without creating a splash. Radar operators tracked it both above and below the surface. The object moved underwater briefly before disappearing from sensors entirely. Analysts reviewing the footage noted that no drone, aircraft, or submarine is capable of transitioning from air to water in that manner without disruption. The ability to move seamlessly between mediums, air and water, suggests advanced propulsion systems far beyond conventional engineering. Traditional aircraft cannot withstand the impact of high-speed water entry. Submarines cannot accelerate through water at the speeds reported in USO cases. The objects appear to bypass the limitations imposed by drag, density, and pressure. In some cases, objects are seen partially submerged, with glowing portions visible beneath the waves. Fishermen off the coast of California in the 1970s reported a bright orb moving below the surface, illuminating the water from beneath. The object moved smoothly in a straight line before angling downward and disappearing. Similar accounts have emerged from Norway, Chile, and Japan, regions known for deep coastal waters and strong naval presence. Commercial pilots have also reported USOs. While flying over the ocean at cruising altitude, crews have seen lights moving beneath the surface, parallel to their aircraft. These lights travel at high speed and maintain consistent depth. Pilots familiar with bioluminescent organisms note that such organisms do not produce structured, controlled movement. The observed objects travel in straight lines, adjust speed, and execute turns with precision. Submarine crews offer some of the most compelling testimony due to their familiarity with underwater acoustics. In the 1990s, a U.S. submarine operating near the Atlantic Ridge tracked an object moving at several hundred knots underwater, a speed impossible for any known vessel. Sonar operators described the sound as minimal, lacking the cavitation or engine noise characteristic of high-speed underwater motion. The object circled the submarine, then vanished. Another incident involved a British submarine in the South Atlantic. Sonar recorded a fast-moving contact approaching from the north. The object moved directly toward the submarine, stopped abruptly, hovered, and then accelerated away vertically. The sudden stop and vertical ascent violated the hydrodynamic principles that govern underwater movement. The crew documented the event, though it remained classified for years. Civilian witnesses have also encountered USOs near coastlines. In the 2000s, residents along the coast of Chile reported bright objects descending into the ocean. The objects moved silently and left no wake. Chile's Naval Aviation Agency investigated, recognizing that the sightings matched patterns seen in earlier military cases. Some USO sightings involve glowing beams or light columns that extend from underwater objects toward the surface. These beams illuminate sections of the ocean, sometimes for several seconds before fading. In one case off the coast of Japan, fishermen saw a broad column of light rising from beneath the water. Moments later, a small glowing sphere emerged from the beam, rose into the air, and accelerated into the night sky. The beam itself then vanished. The consistency of these behaviors smooth entry and exit, high underwater speed, intelligent movement, suggests technology capable of manipulating the medium around it. Some researchers theorize that USOs may use advanced propulsion systems that reduce drag or create a protective field around the craft, allowing it to transition between air and water seamlessly. While speculative, such ideas offer possible frameworks for understanding the extreme maneuvers observed. USOs also appear near oceanic trenches, fault lines, and deep water channels. The Pacific, particularly around the Mariana Trench and the coasts of Japan, is rich with USO reports. The Atlantic Ridge, the Arctic Circle, and segments of the South Pacific also host consistent sightings. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet, and much of its depth remains unexplored. It is possible that large portions of USO activity go unnoticed simply because of the vastness and inaccessibility of the environment. In some regions, USOs appear correlated with seismic activity. Fishermen and coastal residents have observed lights moving underwater shortly before or after underwater tremors. Whether this connection is meaningful or coincidental remains unclear, but the pattern appears in multiple geographical areas. Another recurring theme is the relationship between USOs and larger structured craft. In some sightings, witnesses describe a luminous sphere emerging from the ocean, followed by the appearance of a disk or triangular craft overhead. In others, small underwater lights rise to the surface before joining a larger object in the sky. These interactions hint at coordinated activity between different types of craft, suggesting a hierarchical system or multiple operational roles. The governments of several countries have acknowledged the existence of underwater anomalies without offering explanations. Navy divers, radar operators, and submarine crews continue to report unexplained underwater objects through informal channels. Many of these reports are logged quietly but rarely publicized. USOs occupy a unique position in the phenomenon. They represent the intersection of two worlds, the air above and the water below. Their ability to move through both environments with precision implies a mastery of physics beyond modern engineering. They appear structured, intelligent, and capable of navigating the planet's most challenging environments effortlessly. Where the sky offers openness, visibility, and the possibility of detection, the ocean offers concealment, depth, and complexity. The presence of craft operating freely in both mediums expands the phenomenon beyond aerial objects and into the larger domain of Earth's unseen environments. USOs remind us that the phenomenon does not belong solely to the sky. It interacts with the oceans, the planet's most vast and least explored domain, with the same control, stealth, and intent seen in the air. They challenge the notion that unidentified craft must remain above the surface. Instead, they reveal a dimension of the phenomenon that moves fluidly between worlds. Chapter 8: Plasma-like and energy-based craft. Not every craft encountered in the skies appears solid. Some take forms that look more like concentrated light, dense plasma, or self-contained energy systems. They hold shape, they maneuver intelligently, and they appear on radar or infrared sensors. Yet their outlines blur, their surfaces shimmer, and their movements resemble something closer to electrical phenomena than machinery. These plasma-like craft form a distinct category in the phenomenon. Objects that appear structured, but not entirely physical, luminous yet controlled, fluid yet intelligent. Witnesses often struggle to describe them. They are not simply lights and not merely glows. They behave like contained energy, luminous bodies that maintain cohesion while moving with precision. Their edges pulse, their brightness shifts, and in many cases, they change color, as if their internal energy source is modulating. Some of the earliest reliable accounts of these plasma-like objects come from the 1940s and 1950s, during the same era that disks and Foo Fighters were reported, but where Foo Fighters appeared as small, consistent spheres. These plasma-like craft were often larger, brighter, and more complex. Pilots described them as balls of light with structure, an odd phrase that sat somewhere between description and concession, an attempt to label something that did not fit cleanly into either category. One pilot flying over the North Atlantic in the early 1950s described a large glowing object that followed his aircraft for nearly 15 minutes. It displayed no solid outline, but its luminosity remained contained, pulsing with a soft blue-white glow. At times, it flattened into an oval shape. At others, it compressed into a dense sphere. When the pilot attempted to change course, the object mirrored the motion with perfect synchronization before rising abruptly and disappearing above the clouds. Radar operators tracking the aircraft noted an anomalous return consistent with the object's position, yet the return did not behave like a solid aircraft. It flickered intermittently, as if fluctuating between states. Over the next several decades, similar reports appeared across Europe, North America, and Asia. These luminous craft often appeared at high altitude, far above commercial traffic, where atmospheric disturbances were minimal. Witnesses described soft-edged shapes glowing with internal light, sometimes uniform, sometimes flickering. Their colors ranged widely: white, blue, orange, red, and occasionally green. Yet despite their variety, the underlying behavior remained consistent: controlled flight, sudden acceleration, and intelligent response to nearby aircraft. Scientific interest in these objects increased in the 1980s when the Hessdalen Valley in Norway became a focal point for luminous anomalies. For years, residents observed bright lights hovering, darting, or drifting across the valley, often at low altitude. These lights were not distant stars or reflections. They were close enough for witnesses to see detail: glowing cores surrounded by softer halos, sometimes elongated or teardrop-shaped. They appeared at night and during the day, and their behavior suggested intelligent control. Scientists installed monitoring equipment, cameras, spectrometers, radar, and magnetometers, creating one of the first long-term scientific studies of luminous aerial phenomena. The data revealed several striking features. First, the objects were not illusions. They emitted measurable electromagnetic energy. Second, they appeared sporadically but consistently over years, sometimes multiple times in 1 week. Third, some objects showed internal structure when photographed under long exposure, revealing shapes that resembled capsules or spheres enveloped in plasma. Spectral analysis showed that the lights emitted wavelengths consistent with ionized gas, but the duration and stability of the lights far exceeded the behavior of natural plasma or ball lightning. They were too stable, too controlled, and too variable in shape and color. Some events lasted tens of seconds or more, far longer than naturally occurring ionized atmospheric phenomena. While scientists proposed hypotheses involving dust particles, electromagnetic fields, or geological activity, none fully explained the object's movement, direction changes, or apparent intelligence. Beyond Hessdalen, similar luminous craft appeared in military encounters. In the early 1990s, a group of NATO pilots flying over the Balkans observed a large oval-shaped light pacing their squadron. The object emitted a soft, pulsating glow and maintained a parallel flight path for several minutes. Infrared sensors showed heat, but not in the pattern of an engine or exhaust. Instead, the object displayed a uniform thermal signature, as if its entire surface radiated energy. When the pilots altered course, the object rose rapidly and disappeared. In another incident, a U.S. Air Force crew flying over the eastern Pacific encountered a glowing, orange-red object that appeared suddenly at their altitude. The craft maintained distance from the aircraft, but mirrored their flight path. Radar detected a return consistent with a physical object, yet the infrared system displayed a diffuse heat profile rather than the concentrated signatures typical of propulsion systems. After several minutes, the object elongated into an oblong shape, brightened intensely, and then shot upward at extreme speed. The crew filed a detailed report, noting that the object moved with intention and displayed no aerodynamic characteristics. Civilian witnesses, too, have reported plasma-like objects at close range. In the 1970s, a driver in the American Southwest observed a large glowing ball, roughly the size of a car, hovering above the desert floor. The object emitted a steady blue glow, illuminating the ground below. As the driver approached, the object shifted to an orange color before rising vertically and disappearing. The entire encounter lasted less than a minute, but the driver noted that the light was not blinding. It was soft, enveloping, and uniform. Other witnesses report that plasma-like objects sometimes flicker or phase. Their edges blur. Their luminosity pulses rhythmically. Some appear to vibrate in place before darting away. In a few cases, witnesses claim the objects temporarily vanish before reappearing nearby, as if transitioning between visibility states. These behaviors, while difficult to verify scientifically, appear frequently enough to represent a pattern. What makes plasma-like craft particularly compelling is their consistency in intelligent movement. They follow aircraft. They pace vehicles. They maneuver in ways that reflect awareness, and they accelerate instantaneously, a trait shared across many types of UFOs, but especially pronounced in plasma-like forms. Their ability to maintain shape while shifting brightness or color also suggests underlying mechanisms that regulate energy output rather than physical surface reflection. In some cases, these objects appear to interact with each other. Witnesses describe two or more luminous bodies merging into one brighter shape before separating again. Others report objects exchanging pulses of light, almost as if communicating. While speculative, these patterns hint at coordination or connection between multiple objects. Energy-based craft also appear frequently near electrical infrastructure. Power plants, transmission stations, and substations have recorded anomalous lights hovering or drifting nearby. Some utility workers have reported glowing objects following power lines, moving parallel to cables before rising into the sky. Whether these objects are drawing energy, observing electrical activity, or simply passing through remains unknown. However, the correlation between plasma-like craft and electromagnetic environments is strong enough to appear repeatedly in investigative files. Scientific attempts to explain these objects often focus on natural plasma phenomena. Ball lightning, for example, can produce bright, glowing spheres that move unpredictably. However, ball lightning typically lasts only a few seconds and does not travel in straight lines, respond to aircraft, accelerate vertically, or maintain stable shapes. Atmospheric plasma formations can also occur, but they do not display the structured, intelligent movement seen in these cases. Another hypothesis involves ionized air created by rare geological or atmospheric events. But again, these explanations fail when applied to objects that follow aircraft at high altitude, appear in clear weather, or accelerate abruptly. The plasma-like craft behave with too much control to be explained by natural processes alone. Some researchers propose that these objects may use forms of propulsion involving electromagnetic fields. If a craft could manipulate the air around it, ionizing it, compressing it, or shielding its surface, it could reduce drag, produce light, and move without traditional lift surfaces. While such technology remains speculative, it offers one possible framework for understanding the diffused edges, uniform heat signatures, and variable luminosity of plasma-like craft. Others suggest the objects may represent a form of energy-based vehicle, partially physical, partially electromagnetic. Their appearance could shift depending on their energy state, making them appear brighter or more diffuse under certain conditions. Their ability to blink out could reflect transitions between states that are only partially visible to observers. Witnesses often describe these objects as beautiful, even hypnotic. Unlike metallic craft, which impose themselves on the environment, plasma-like craft seem to blend softly into their surroundings while remaining clearly defined. Their movement is graceful, their edges gentle, their presence serene. Yet beneath that calm appearance lies a level of capability that far exceeds natural or technological explanations. In the broader craft library, energy-based vehicles occupy an important middle ground. They are neither entirely structured like disks or triangles, nor entirely fluid like shape-shifting objects. They exist in a hybrid space, luminous, cohesive, controlled. They expand the phenomenon beyond physical hardware into something more dynamic, something that appears to manipulate energy as easily as physical form. They remind us that not all craft must be solid to be real. Some travel as coherent energy, maintaining identity while shifting shape, brightness, or state. Plasma-like craft challenge the idea that technology must be made of metal, engines, and surfaces. Instead, they reveal a spectrum of possibilities, systems that move through the sky like concentrated light, guided by intelligence and capable of maneuvers beyond any aircraft. They are the softest forms in the phenomenon, but also among the most advanced. Chapter 9. Hybrids and Outliers. Across decades of reports, from pilots, radar operators, naval crews, and ordinary witnesses, most unidentified craft fall into recognizable patterns. Disks, triangles, spheres, rectangles, Tic Tacs, fluid forms, and plasma-like objects each form consistent families. Their shapes recur. Their behaviors repeat. Their movement aligns with distinct categories. But there is another group that does not fit neatly into any structure: the hybrids and outliers. These are the craft that combine features from multiple categories, shift between behaviors, or defy description altogether. They appear rarely, but consistently enough to form their own quiet lineage in the phenomenon, a set of objects that seem to operate beyond familiar patterns. While earlier chapters dealt with craft that maintain stable silhouettes, the hybrids are objects that blur those lines. They may begin as one shape and end as another. They may move like disks, but glow like plasma. They may split like fluid-form craft, but accelerate like Tic Tacs. Some appear to shift mediums, air, water, or something in between, with seamless control. These outliers form the boundary of what we can categorize. They represent the edges of the phenomenon where structure dissolves, transitions occur, and the technology behind these objects hints at capabilities beyond anything previously described. The earliest documented hybrids appeared in the 1950s and 1960s, though at the time they were classified simply as oddities. Witnesses reported objects that were metallic one moment and luminous the next, or craft that emitted smaller objects before transforming and accelerating away. Military investigators often placed these reports in miscellaneous folders, unable to classify them under disks, spheres, or structured craft. One of the first significant hybrid cases occurred in 1966 over Brazil. A group of fishermen observed a bright, oval-shaped object descending toward the ocean. As it drew closer, the craft shifted from an oval into a square-like shape, its edges becoming straight and defined. It hovered above the water, emitting a soft hum. Moments later, it elongated into a cigar shape, rotated, and released two bright spheres that moved independently. The main craft then contracted into a smaller form before shooting upward. The fishermen, accustomed to marine lights and aircraft, were struck by the deliberate transformations, none of which resembled natural phenomena. In the 1970s, another hybrid appeared over Spain during a commercial flight. The crew observed a glowing disk approaching their aircraft from below. As it neared, the disk flattened and emitted a bright ring of light. The outer ring expanded outward, forming a translucent halo, while the inner object became a solid, bright sphere. For several seconds, the sphere and ring rotated around each other before the sphere shot upward and vanished. The halo faded seconds later. Radar detected a brief return, but its speed and profile did not match conventional aircraft. The crew struggled to classify what they had seen: part disk, part sphere, part energy event. In the decades that followed, hybrid sightings continued, though often quietly. Investigators began noticing patterns: objects that changed shape depending on altitude, objects that shifted from luminous to metallic under different angles, objects that divided and recombined with purposeful trajectories. These craft behaved as though they were not fixed devices, but adaptable systems. One compelling hybrid case emerged from Chile in the early 2000s. Military pilots flying near the Andes encountered a luminous object that appeared as a bright sphere from a distance. As they approached, the sphere elongated into a disc-like form and emitted a blue glow. The object then tilted, revealing a darker underside that looked metallic, not luminous. For several minutes, it combined characteristics of multiple craft types: the agility of a sphere, the structured profile of a disk, and the energy signature of plasma. When the pilots attempted to intercept, the object accelerated with the instantaneous motion seen in Tic Tac encounters. It disappeared within seconds. Naval encounters also include hybrid behavior. One U.S. Navy crew recorded an object that rose from the ocean as a glowing orb, hovered briefly, and then shifted into a structured, metallic-looking shape before moving horizontally at extreme speed. The transformation was smooth, not flickering, not dissolving, but a coherent change in form. Radar tracked it before and after the shift, confirming that both states represented the same object. These sightings suggest that some craft may operate in multiple modes or states. One possibility is that their appearance changes depending on energy output, speed, or operational purpose. For example, a craft traveling at extreme speed may adopt a minimal energy-efficient form, while a craft gathering data or hovering might expand or restructure itself. These transformations could be deliberate adaptations rather than anomalies. Yet some hybrids defy even these theoretical explanations. One civilian sighting from the American Midwest involved a family observing a large triangular object with bright corner lights. As it hovered, the lights detached and moved independently, small spheres that rotated around the main craft. The triangular craft then dissolved into a bright, rectangular form before compressing into a single bright orb that shot into the sky. The entire event lasted less than a minute, but each transformation appeared controlled and intentional. The witnesses struggled to articulate what they had seen, describing it as a craft that became several craft, then one again. In another case near the Baltics, a commercial fishing crew observed a rectangular object hovering above the water. As they approached, the object folded inward, its edges collapsing until it became a spherical shape. The sphere then brightened intensely, shifted into an elongated form, and descended into the water without a splash. Sonar operators on nearby vessels detected a brief underwater contact moving at high speed. The transformations did not fit the behavior of drones, aircraft, or natural lights. Some of the most puzzling hybrid encounters involve objects transitioning between solid and luminous states. Witnesses describe metallic surfaces that suddenly glow from within, losing their reflective texture and becoming translucent or brightly lit. Some objects flicker between states, momentarily revealing structured outlines before returning to diffuse luminosity. These transitions often coincide with dramatic changes in movement, sudden acceleration, vertical ascent, or phase-like disappearance. Investigators who study these outliers point out that changes in luminosity, outline, or shape may indicate advanced manipulation of energy fields around the craft. If an object can alter the density or configuration of the space immediately around it, its appearance could change as a byproduct. Such a craft might appear solid under some conditions and luminous under others, depending on how it interacts with air, light, and electromagnetic fields. Hybrid craft also show unusual reactions to proximity. In several accounts, objects change form when approached by aircraft. A disk might flatten further, a sphere might brighten, or a rectangular object might compress. These reactions imply situational awareness and deliberate responses to nearby observers. In some cases, the transformations occur only after attempted intercepts, as if the craft are adjusting shape for escape or observation. Another defining characteristic of hybrid craft is their multi-medium versatility. While USOs specialize in underwater operations, hybrids are sometimes seen entering or exiting clouds, fog, rain, or even mountainous terrain with surprising adaptability. Witnesses in Ireland reported a glowing object that appeared to pass through a hillside without collision, shifting from luminous to diffuse as it neared the terrain, then regaining shape on the other side. Whether this represented an illusion, cloaking, or a state shift remains unknown. These outliers often accompany structured craft. Investigators reviewing clustered sightings note that hybrid objects sometimes appear moments before or after disks or triangular craft. In some cases, hybrids serve as intermediaries, appearing first as energy forms before becoming structured, or appearing structured before dissolving into smaller, plasma-like lights. This sequencing hints that the phenomenon may involve multiple stages or modes, not fixed shapes. Some researchers propose that hybrid craft might represent advanced forms, prototypes, or specialized vehicles within a broader ecosystem of objects. Others suggest that hybrids are not different craft at all, but different states of the same underlying technology, capable of shifting structure, energy output, or configuration depending on purpose. The rarity of hybrids does not make them less important. In fact, their presence reveals the widest range of capabilities in the phenomenon. They show that unidentified craft are not limited to rigid forms or predictable motion. Instead, they occupy a continuum, transitioning between shapes, states, and mediums with fluid control. The hybrids and outliers expand the boundaries of what these objects might be. They demonstrate adaptation, versatility, and behaviors that surpass the limits of conventional engineering. They hint at a form of technology where structure is flexible, energy is integral, and form follows purpose rather than physics. In the craft library, the hybrids represent the edge, the point where classification becomes impossible, where the phenomenon reveals its complexity most clearly. They remind us that the shapes we categorize are only snapshots. The phenomenon might not be one thing or one technology, but a spectrum, a range of capabilities expressed through shapes that shift, merge, dissolve, or recombine. These outliers are the phenomenon at its most advanced, the forms that refuse to stay in one category, that move between states with complete control, that reveal a depth beyond simple silhouettes. They are the closing chapter, not because they answer the questions, but because they show how much remains unknown.